Have you ever had pushback when something big was happening next? That's what we're going to talk about today. Hi, this is Jill from the Northwoods, talking about how to make your life better one small step at a time. Think about it. You finally committed to something, said yes, you took a step, and you started moving towards the thing that matters the most. And suddenly, there's friction, pushback. There's weight going against you when there wasn't weight before. And maybe there's a voice in your head saying, oh, you know what, maybe I should stop. Maybe this wasn't meant to be. And there's a moment where you probably watched 100 times without realizing what you were actually seeing. Pressure is a privilege. So after I heard it on Father Mike Schmidt's podcast when he mentioned it, I started thinking about it a little bit more. And you've seen it probably, like I said, 100 times. A reporter shoves a microphone in front of someone, a quarterback, the fourth quarter, a musician, right before a giant stadium show, an entrepreneur who just had something happened that could change everything. And they ask him, how do you handle the pressure? And the good ones, the ones who've been around long enough, almost smile when they answer this because they figured out something. Pressure is the point. It is the point. And there's a famous incident with Billie Jean King, and she was a tennis legend, and she said once, pressure is a privilege. And she later explained, pressure is a privilege and champions adjust. You get that full idea that when you have tremendous pressure, it is because an opportunity came along with it. There are similar versions from it too. Novak Djokovic says pressure is a privilege, means you're doing something important. Vladimir Tarasenko said that I think that pressure is a privilege. It means you're doing something important. They should all have easier to say names. But I think when I was younger and I would work on a project, I'd work on something and the pressure started to build, it made me instantly think something was wrong. What if the pressure is evidence that something isn't right, that I don't have the right plans, that I didn't think about this, that maybe I'm not strong enough to do this? Maybe you start feeling the pressure because people count on you. The pressure is because you care. The pressure is because you've given an opportunity that younger you might have been thrilled with, and now it's making you nervous. And you can move through the examples. Think about it. Pressure at work means people trust you. Pressure before a presentation means that someone thought your idea was worth hearing, even if it might stir up the hornet's nest. Pressure before retirement means that you've built a life worth protecting. And pressure before publishing a podcast even, it means that what you say, people might hear it and listen to you. And it's worth thinking about because pressure is proof that the stakes are real, the benefit, the payoff is real, but also there are risks involved in it. If an athlete said, well, I don't feel pressure, that you might think that he doesn't think very much of the sport, that he doesn't think it matters. And now it doesn't matter if he wins or loses or she wins or loses. That's the idea that when you don't have the pressure happening, you end up feeling like maybe it just doesn't even matter at all. And if the voice has it right, what if resistance in general, when we get it, isn't a stop sign? What if it's a proof of motion? What if pressure isn't a punishment, but instead, if pressure is that privilege, that's what's going to keep us going? I think we misunderstand it very often because, I think in any growth that I've had in my life, whether it's work growth, faith growth, my life growth, anytime there's been resistance, like I said, the first thought we think of is, I must be doing something wrong. And the voice inside our head tells us it's time to, pull back a little, rethink the plan, maybe not do what we were thinking about. You're hoping not to coast. You're hoping that you're going to start getting some of the lives that you want to have. You want to build something. You want to become something. You want a life that actually means something. And even if you haven't taken those steps yet, you want those things, whatever it is they are. And so you will face resistance. Absolutely. But the question is what do you do with it? And we're going to dig into kind of that idea. I want, you to think about this, that when you're sitting still, like maybe right before bed when you're falling asleep, or, you're just sitting there for a minute. If nothing is pushing back on you, there's no resistance, life is perfectly smooth. But that also means that you're not moving. There's no headwinds because you're not going anywhere. But when you start to move, there's friction, there's drag, there's wind resistance. I mean, even if you're on a bicycle, right? It's physics. As soon as you start going in a direction, if you stuck your head out the car window, it's going to have resistance, right? It means you're moving. An airplane flight doesn't fight the wind because the wind is the enemy. It fights the wind because that's what requires to have a flight at all. You can't get lift without resistance. You can't get altitude without headwinds. The headwinds doesn't mean that you're going the wrong direction. It means you're going. And so now this is where I want to take it a step further and be a little bit more direct about it, because I think this is where a lot of self-help advice falls apart. A lot of times you hear a mainstream message that if you're struggling, something's wrong. If something's hard, maybe you're just not cut out for this. If there's ease, in there, oh, that means you're in the right lane. Oh, that means everything's going your way. And I think it's exactly quite the opposite, or even backwards. Ease means that at times you're not stretching. Comfort means that you might be shrinking. No resistance means that you might not be moving at all. And so if I want to, I guess, offer this reframe to you, and it's pretty simple, but I think it's pretty powerful. Resistance is not a sign that you're doing something wrong. Resistance is evidence that you're doing something enough, that you're doing something that matters. And if you think about that for a second, you have been doing something, really something, and it's earning you resistance. You have to be moving enough, growing enough, building something real enough, building something that matters enough to have pushback, wherever direction it's coming from. Nobody gets significant pushback for staying the same. Nobody faces serious question or oppositions for playing it safe. And nobody deals with real friction while they're standing still. If pressure finds you when you start to matter, when your choices start to have weight, when the direction you're heading in actually threatens maybe something comfortable, something easy, something settled, some settled version of your life that has no requirements of you, then it's essentially you're gonna get pressure now. That's where the pressure is. And that's why pressure is a privilege. And not everyone is going to understand that, because not everyone earns it. Only ones who earn it are the ones who are moving. I think too, I'm a person of faith, and I think God trains in the hard places. I'm not going to talk too much about faith, but if you're walking, genuinely walking in a nodding direction towards God, even if you're at a distance, you're going to face resistance. Not to spite your faith, but because of it. God does not train us, I think, in comfortable places. He trains us in hard places. And so I think about a lot of places, people in the Bible too, they all faced headwinds wherever they went. Nobody had an easy ride of it. The resistance isn't the absence of a blessing. The resistance is a training ground. And so that's where I believe in that. And if you're walking in faith, you will get resistance. Not might, but you will. And I think now if you're not getting any resistance in your life, it's actually worth asking yourself the question, are you actually moving anywhere? And it's not a judgment. I spent many of my years in my life not moving places. I have had to ask myself that question too in the past, and maybe you do too. A life that costs you nothing, a faith that costs you nothing, changes nothing. It challenges nothing. And it's not a faith or a life or a plan that goes anywhere. A life with zero friction is a life with zero risks, is a life where you don't go anywhere. You don't get the things. And it's really, it really means that you have to start thinking about where you're going, where you need to move towards. And I think God never wastes difficulty. He always uses it. He refines us with it. He builds character through it. and he shows up in the middle of it in ways that we never would have expected. So I think the question is now that you looked at resistance, you get it. We've named it. It's evidence of motion as a training ground. It is a privilege. It means you're going somewhere and doing something. I don't want, I guess, to just leave you with a mindset shift on that. I want to give you something really practical, because when you're in the middle of pressure, it doesn't feel like a privilege. It feels like a wall. And this is what I think we're invited to do when we get into that position, is first of all, we have to name it. What is this resistance? Say it out loud. This is resistance. This is what moving feels like. This kind of resistance is because I'm getting out of my comfort zone. Go ahead. But the single act of naming what it is that's going on right now breaks the panic. It breaks the power of panic to shift you back into nothingness again. It shifts you from reacting to observing, more like a scientist going, I see what's happening now. I'm starting to move in my life and do something important. This is the resistance. That's the resistance, and it's a privilege. Second is to ask the right kind of question. Instead of saying, is this a sign I should stop, which is the question I used to ask myself all the time, instead ask, what is this teaching me right now? That question puts you in the posture of a student or a scientist or examining something instead of being a victim. When you're studying something, the pressure becomes your curriculum. It becomes your evidence of discovery. And the third thing is don't confuse hard with wrong. One of the things I think that trips people up the most is when something starts getting hard, they feel instantaneously, I must be on the wrong path, doing the wrong thing, doing it the wrong way. It's not true. Difficult does not mean not for me. Difficult, it doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. Some of the most right things you will ever do in your life are going to be deeply, genuinely hard. And hard, let it be hard, but don't let it be a verdict about what it is you're doing. And then the fourth is stay in motion. If the whole thing is gaining progress, this is the core. Small steps, keep taking them, no giant leaps, no heroic surges. Just don't stop. The pressure is not stronger than your next step. Take it anyway. And there's a sailing principle. I was trying to think of a good analogy for this when I was working on this, is that sometimes when people hear resistance, it means you're moving. Think, okay, fine. Then I just won't move. No motion, no headwind, no friction. I'll just stay in the harbor where it's nice and calm. And I think that when sailors know that something that the rest of us forget, that the storm doesn't care where you're at. It will find you in the harbor too. Staying still doesn't protect you from hard things, difficulties. It just means that you're standing without any skills, without any movement. You're not getting out of the way. You are just stuck right there. And without any momentum, you just end up being right there, and that storm hits you anyway. When you're moving, even slowly, you start to feel things. A light breeze at first, maybe a firm one a little bit later on. You learn to read the water. You start developing instincts, and you start positioning yourself. And here's what the positioning gives you. It starts to give you options. If serious weather's coming, and a sailor knows this who's been sailing, they know how to angle into it or angle away from it. Let the storm glance off of them rather hitting it straight on. They use the very forces that would capsize them in the harbor to carry them through. That person's still standing in the harbor, they just get hit. They never built the skills. They never understood the headwinds or the waves or the water. They never learned to tack to the left or the right. And so they're focused on avoiding the headwinds, and then they forgot to prepare for the storm anyway. If you're not increasing your risk by moving forward, you are building the capacity to meet what's coming, whatever it is, and deal with it. The breeze is not a warning. The breeze that started you out is training you. And right now, if you are not under pressure, it's not because something's wrong with you. If you are under pressure, it's not because you're doing something wrong. When you get in pressure, It means that you are doing something real, that you're doing something that matters, that you're doing something that might shake things up or change things. You are going to face resistance in life, and it's not because it's necessarily the wrong thing. Of course, make sure you're doing the right thing. Make sure you understand what you're doing and the ramifications, but don't just take the resistance as a sign that this shouldn't happen. You're not facing resistance because God abandoned you in this. I've heard people say that too. You're not facing resistance because you're moving. Instead, you are moving, and that is causing resistance of all sorts of kinds, and it's a sign you're getting someplace. The headwinds is not your enemy. It's evidence and proof that you are in motion and that your life has a direction and that your steps actually have some weight to them. And so pressure, again, is not a punishment. Pressure is a privilege. So take your next small step, even if it's in the headwind, maybe even especially if it's in the headwind. All right, everyone, thanks so much. I appreciate you being out there. I hope that these have been helpful to you. I feel like, these small steps can get us through some of the biggest challenges we have in our lives. You can email me at jill@startwithsmallsteps.com. Appreciate hearing from you, and I hope you're doing well. Just have a great day, and like I said, start feeling those headwinds on your face.